Alright, welcome to the masterclass. Well, not played by me, but by Shara Smith and Joshua Christie, two of Jamaica's leading players and FMs. Let's go. We have E4 by Shiras and E5 by Joshua Christie. Knight F3, Knight C6, and now we see this move. Bishop to C4 going into the Italian game. Knight F6 as a response, and now we see pawn to D3, just protecting that pawn on E4. And now bishop to E7, one of the calmer lines. Now bishop C5 is also a good move, but Joshua chooses bishop to E7. We see castles from both sides, and now this move, knight to C3. Very, very interesting. It just keeps an eye out on that D5 square, and we see pawn to D6. Again, in most lines where you see black getting in D5, that's just out the door, thanks to this knight. We have pawn to d6 and now a4. Now a4 is again one of the main lines, and it's aimed at putting a pawn on a5, just again clamping down on that queen side and giving this bishop an escape square towards a2, as knight to a5 is a common move in these types of scenarios. We see now knight a5 and bishop to a2, pawn to c5 clamping down on d4, so ensuring that this game stays closed. And white plays this very important move, bishop to g5. Now, because black wasted time just now to play pawn to c5, it created a big hole on this d5 square, which white just capitalized on immediately. Bishop to g5, knight back to c6, bishop takes, and now you guys guessed it. It's knight to d5 on the board, and white is completely satisfied with the square. Now we have g6. White did give up the bishop here, so black is playing g6 now to play this move, bishop to g7, and preserve the material in which he was given. Now at the highest levels, bishop pairs are very important. So let's go. We have queen to d2, and this move is quote unquote a novelty, as I've been told. We'll do some, further research where this is concerned. But for now, we have queen to d2 on the board. Now black finishes development with bishop to e6, and now we see c3. Now, first glance, c3 looks as if it's going to, aid in white, sorry, putting this pawn on d4. But furthermore, it's for b4. Now, remember, black has the bishop here, yes, but it's not so obvious where the dark square bishop for black goes in these types of positions. So black plays bishop to g7, and currently that's a very ugly piece. So we see b4, not d4 opening the game, but b4 from white, expanding on the queen side. We have takes, and now rook to c8, just improving a piece, and white does the same. Now, this is the first move that Joshua played in which the engine doesn't like, and it's bishop to g4. Now, bishop to g4 comes with the threat of just ruining white's structure and playing moves such as queen to h4 and bishop to h6. So, this is a well-timed move. White takes the time out to play pawn to b5 and hit the knight on c6 and asks black, what is the purpose of your last move, which is bishop to g4? Now, if you foolishly capture and play knight to d4, you're going to realize that that is going to succumb to some serious damages on the black side. Now, furthermore, the move pawn to b5 is not to take back on f3. No, it's actually after bishop takes f3 to play pawn takes c6 dynamite. And this is actually a pawn sacrifice by the FIDE master. Now, what does pawn take c6 accomplish? Now, after the simple pawn capture, white was supposed to play knight to e3 in this game and, clamp this bishop out of squares. No, knight to e3 and this bishop is running out. Let's say after bishop to h5, we could have g4 and that bishop is just dead. But in the game, Shiraz played knight to b4. It's still winning, but knight to e3 could have given white like a tiny bit more edge. Queen to g5 And h4, you have some complications right there, but all ends with white being on top. But we have knight to b4 here. And even though the engine is saying that this is equal, again, from a human's perspective, this is very difficult to play. Hitting the bishop on f3, hitting the pawn on c6, and Joshua pushes it. Best move recommended by the engine. And white takes the time out to put his knight back on d5. Again, we'll call this the square of the game. Knight back on d5, and now Joshua takes this time out to preserve his bishop. We have rook to b1, simply improving the piece. And bishop to e6, and you know what happens when you start going retreating mode? You die. But this was the last chance in which I think black had, where he could have played queen to d7 to stop the infiltration. But because of what happened earlier, I don't even know why he backtracked the piece here, but he paid the price. Bishop to e6 on the board, and Shiras immediately responded with rook to b7. We have captures, and now we see the idea of what Joshua was trying. He's going to go into an opposite color bishop, but we all know in these types of scenarios that the side that is attacking is the side that has the advantage in these types of scenarios, because this bishop on g7 is not really in the game. We see pawn to c4, a pawn sack. So yeah, Joshua took some time here. I think like first glance you look at this and you're like, okay, opposite color bishops, easy draw, but the more you look into this position, you realize that it's really hard to play black here. Now, this engine is already giving this position as 1.5 for white, even though white is down a pawn. Now, the calm and composed rook to c7 is what I would have chosen, but it still loses in the long run. So instead of suffering, Joshua does what Joshua does and lashes out and plays pawn to c4. Now, I am a master and I actually understand this move completely. It's a case where you don't want to sit and play passively forever. Plus c4 actually gives a square for your pieces into the future. So we have pawn to c4, pawn takes c4, and now rook to c7. The difference being that this c5 square is now a little bit freer for black's pieces. And again, you gave back the pawn, but it's a case where white just has a piece on d5, super active, but it has no retreating square in the process also. We have rook to b1, just finishing I would call it, just connecting the rooks. But we see here king to h8 by black. And this is signaling this move pawn to f5 into the position. This is just to keep this rook on f8 active by pushing this pawn forward. And we see queen to e3 as a response from white, hitting this pawn on a7. Now, because black is so passive, he doesn't have any time to worry about material. Takes the time out to take on b7, rook takes b7, and now queen a5. Giving this pawn up, which Charles happily takes. Rook takes a7. Queen to b4 on the board, and this move, what you're about to see, I don't think anybody in the chat can guess this, or who is actually watching could guess this, but Charles played g4 here, which is absolute mastery of the position. Pawn to g4 stops f5. And if you even, let's say that you play f5, you could take and play queen to g3. Like, black is collapsing on the 7th rank. We see bishop to f6, desperately trying to get some activity for the pieces, and Shura shows no mercy. Bishop takes f7 on the board, completely shattering the black's position. We have queen to b2. Joshua keeps his composure and tries to stay active. And you know what? I won't even waste your time. Bishop takes g6 on the board. And again, another dynamite from Shara Smith. If pawn takes, queen to h6, and that's mate in 2, it's finished. We see a last attempt by Joshua Christie. Bishop to g5, and Shiras wastes no time. If you take, obviously, that's just mate in 2. But Shiras had better things up his sleeve and took this pawn on h7, followed by, you guessed it, queen to a7, threatening checkmate in 1. Bishop f6 was a last try by Joshua, but you know what's happening. Rook to H8, and Black resigned. And that was the game from the Battle of the Nights tournament. See you again another time.